Hey, this is Patrick Sullivan. Welcome to my shop. When I started woodworking, most of my work was rigidly rectangular, straight lines and 90-degree angles. However, once I became confident enough to handle curves, I've tried to find ways to incorporate them into almost everything I make. Curves have the power to transform mundane shapes into eye-catching beauty. One of the most important tools for curvy woodworkers is the compass. I learned to make circles in elementary school with this particular compass. I'm sure it did not cost more than about 15 cents, and it actually has some very clever engineering built into its stamped metal. Can you see the trapped ball bearing and the angle scale? As the years went by, I thought I deserved a big boy compass. I bought this one, which is a decent design, but really not much larger. Next, I bought this one, which looks kind of technical, like it should be owned by a draftsman. It's okay, but I'm not in love with it. At the same time, I quickly realized that a far handier way of drawing most small circles and arcs was to use a circle template like this one. This is a very convenient way to try out different sizes to round both inside and outside corners, for example, or to handle a transition between two straight lines. On the other hand, when it comes to really large diameter arcs, for example an arched doorway, the best bet is a beam compass. Of course, you can always just drive a nail in a long piece of wood and drill a small hole for the point of a pencil, and you will cobble together a makeshift beam compass. But I like having a sturdy, easily adjustable one ready to go whenever I need it. This is a design that I made many years ago based on a video by Matthias Wandel. I will put a link to his video in the description below. In between the very small circles and cathedral-sized arcs, there lie a lot of shapes that appear in the furniture and household products that I like to build. I thought it would be nice to have a larger, more substantial compass. A big boy compass. And not just two sticks held together with a screw. Something respectable, distinguished. I may have gotten a little carried away with the desire to make something in the tradition of the beautiful hand tools from a century ago. I'll show you how I built it. I played around with the design on my computer and built a quick prototype in scrap pine to fine-tune both the look and the feel, but I never wanted to use softwood for the compass. About 20 years ago, I bought a small piece of rosewood, intending to make something special with it someday. Its time has finally come. I printed full-size templates and glued them to strips of rosewood that I milled up off-camera. Each leg is composed of 2 layers glued together. Each layer is 10 millimeters or 3/8 of an inch thick. The template shows the center for drilling the holes for the central pivot. I center punched them and then drilled as carefully as I could. I cut the 4 pieces approximately to shape on the bandsaw. I didn't feel like changing the big blade on my bandsaw, so I shaped the round tops very roughly with some straight cuts. The fully round tops were then shaped on a disc sander. 120 grit sandpaper makes quick work of creating smooth curves. It seemed important to me to establish the pivot mechanism at an early stage because the 2 legs are designed to mate together closely and they have to fit fairly precisely. The solution was a binding post screw, a specialized nut and bolt combination often used to hold scrapbooks and albums together. The nut is a barrel, which serves as the smooth shaft or pivot around which both legs revolve. Both legs bear on the smooth plated surface of the nut rather than on the sharp edges of the threaded screw, which are enclosed by the barrel nut. The barrel nut I used is 18 millimeters tall, which is just 1 millimeter shorter than the thickness of the finished compass. The screw had to be cut shorter so that it fit entirely inside the barrel nut. That's easy to do with a hacksaw. When the screw is tightened into the nut, it pulls the 2 legs of the compass together. This provides the friction required for smooth, stable rotation. Once the pivot is functional, the mating pieces, which have inside curves, can be shaped. Now, this could be easily and accurately handled on a spindle sander. Unfortunately, I don't have a spindle sander, so I shaped them with a handheld grinder. This is a trial and error process to get a good fit. I think there may be better ways to do this. Before the two halves of each leg are glued together, I cut a very shallow recess to accommodate the stainless steel wing, which will lock the legs into position to draw the desired radius. The wing is 1 millimeter thick, so I made the recess about 2 millimeters deep. The wing is curved, so I widened the recess to a generous curved shape with a hand chisel. I glued the legs while they were attached to the pivot nut because I wanted to ensure that all 4 pieces would align perfectly. However, I had to be careful that the glue squeeze-out did not interfere with the joint movement. I coated both surfaces completely, but thinly. I wiped off any squeeze-out immediately. This worked well. I don't know what the perfect glue for rosewood is. This wood contains waxes that may reduce the bonding strength of some glues. However, the Chinese built thousands of chairs from rosewood in the previous centuries at a time when modern glues were not available. Most of those chairs held up reasonably well. I decided to use Titebond 3, and it seems to be satisfactory so far. Its darker color works better with dark wood. If the compass has 2 legs, then this compass also has 2 feet. The feet allow a variety of marking devices to be used. The easiest way to drill holes for the awls, pencils, and pens is to do the drilling on small, perfectly rectangular blocks that can be held perpendicularly in a vise. I bored 6 millimeter holes in both feet for the pointed steel rods that act as divider points or can be the centers for circles and arcs. On one foot, I bored a hole sized for common wood pencils. On the other, I bored a larger hole that would accommodate felt tip and ballpoint markers. This will also fit the new Pen Touch white marker I am using. More on that later. I made the 2 blocks a little wider than necessary to increase their stability while drilling. After the holes were done, I trimmed each block. I will add a set screw into the side that I am trimming here, so I left enough wood to give enough screw threads to assure a good grip. The design calls for mounting these blocks at a 15-degree angle to the leg. I used this angle jig that I made in a previous video. Set the jig to 15 degrees, clamped the leg firmly against the fence, and sawed a perfectly flat bevel with my fingers nowhere near the blade. This can certainly be done in other ways as well. This small block will try to slide out of position when it has glue on it, so I taped the block to the leg first, then applied the glue. I wiped away the squeeze-out and then taped the pieces more thoroughly to prevent sliding. I clamped it only after both pieces were securely immobilized. When the glue had cured, I pasted on the paper template again and cut out the curved relief areas on my scroll saw. Rosewood cuts beautifully, and you can see that the finish right off the saw is nearly perfect. I then angled the ends of the legs 25 degrees on my table saw using the miter jig. It'll look like this when it's finished. I looked around for a source of thin, springy stainless steel for the wing. The best option I could find was this large, inexpensive barbecue spatula. It's exactly 1 millimeter thick. You can buy thicker ones, but this has just the right degree of flexibility. Stainless is amazingly strong and rigid for its size. I have no concerns that this wing will bend or distort. I cut the inside curve first because it's the most difficult and because it'll be easier to hold against a sanding drum before the second side is cut. I found I could hold it by hand to vary the position on the sanding drum. The outside curve is easier to cut with an abrasive disc, with a succession of straight lines if you want. It can be sanded on just about any flat sander. It does get hot, and I found it helpful to hold it with a vice grip pliers. Once it was shaped and sanded, I cut several small notches in one end. It'll be glued in place, and the notches help the epoxy to hold onto it firmly. Clear packing tape forms a dam at one end of the glue mortise. I masked out the other end to minimize cleanup. Every second you spend masking pays off at least 10 to 1 by reducing cleanup problems at a later point. I deliberately made both mortises a little wider than the wing. Once the legs are glued together, I have no way to adjust the angle of the wing, so my idea was to allow some room for error. I tried to center the wing in both mortises as accurately as I could. However, I was worried that the positioning would be slightly off. As soon as the epoxy had stopped being runny, I gently rotated the leg that has the free mortise to verify that the wing did not bind anywhere along its arc. Then I let it set up overnight. The points could be made out of any steel rod. I made mine out of some 6mm 01 tool steel rod that was sitting idle in my scrap bin. I made a very simple jig to hold the rod at a 10-degree angle on my disc sander. I chucked the rod in my drill and spun it the opposite way from the disc. I then quickly realized that my jig served no important purpose. Well, maybe no purpose at all. I needed to continuously adjust the angle to get the taper I wanted, and I found I could easily handhold the rod and gauge the shape entirely by eye. When I was satisfied with the shape, I heated the points to a bright orange color and quenched them in peanut oil. I then gave them half an hour in my oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, about 200 degrees Celsius. My goal was not maximum hardness. I just wanted them tough enough to hold a sharp point. I needed 5 set screws. I considered using threaded inserts, but the size and bulk of the inserts just seemed excessive. Instead, I used a tap to cut threads directly into the wood. This works surprisingly well in hard woods. The smaller set screws were M4s, which use very fine threads. Delicate threads in wood worried me a little, but in fact, they worked great. I drilled holes slightly smaller than the drill size recommended for metal. This results in probably more than 75% engagement, and the screws feel firm and solid. Even though rosewood is very hard and the hole is a little undersized, the tap cuts through it much more easily than it does in metal. The wing needed a bigger screw, and I found a knurled M5 machine screw that seemed about right. I held the tap in my drill press to keep it straight during the first few turns. Incidentally, I did a test on a scrap of rosewood, and then later photographed the result with my microscope. You can see that the threads are very well formed, with virtually no chipping or tear out. I'm very satisfied with this process. My impressions? Well, I think this is a gorgeous tool. I love the wood, I love the shape, the design, the feel of it. I didn't use any varnish, just a couple of coats of Renaissance wax. Time will tell whether this was a good decision or not. I've used this process on a number of tool handles that I made as much as 15 years ago, and they've held up really well. The finished compass works very smoothly. It's trivially easy to switch from one drawing instrument to another, or from one pencil color to another. I really like the fact that I can use a variety of markers. Sometimes I work in dark woods, or melamine, polycarbonate, and a variety of metals. A pencil is just not enough for those surfaces. In a search for an opaque white marker, I stumbled upon a product which fits into this compass and produces terrific results. The Pen Touch Extra Fine Marker lays down a 0.7mm white line that dries very quickly and adheres to most smooth surfaces, including plastic and metal. Machinists need a much finer line, but this is actually not much wider than the pencil marks we woodworkers are accustomed to. Now, I realize you can buy big, durable compasses aimed at contractors and machinists, and they're not terribly expensive. But I don't care. I think this tool is beautiful. I like its appearance, I like its balance, and I like its style. I think it'll serve me well for the rest of my life, and it was fun to build. If you're interested in making something like this, I would encourage you to customize the design to meet your personal needs and tastes. For those who like this one, I'm putting up full-size templates, free of charge, on my website, which is listed in the description below. These are not full-fledged, foolproof plans with dimensions and tolerances, but they would get you started, and you could scale them up or down on your printer to sizes that you like. One tip: spend a few minutes thinking about the hardware you need before you get too far along. If you don't have access to a machine shop, then you have to design around the screws you can buy. Well, that's about it for today. As always, thanks for watching.